Okay, thanks everybody for being here today. As we continue welcoming people to the event, I don't want to waste a single minute that we have today. We're gonna have just 1 hour together. So I just want to start out by thanking a few people who made this event possible today. First, I would like to thank Brendan Barnes from the University of Johannesburg for making this event possible. I also want to thank UC's Center for Public Engagement with Science for helping to support this event and bringing visibility to it today. And I also want to thank the University of Cincinnati's International Office for inspiring how this event has taken shape. The University of Cincinnati and the University of Johannesburg are strategic partner institutions. So this event is part of strengthening that partnership that exists across our universities. And lastly, I want to thank today's panelists from across universities. I can't wait to hear what you have to say today. And of course, this event would not be possible without you. So thanks for being here. So let's get started. Today's event is a World Café that's focused on climate justice. Climate justice is a framework, an approach, it's a perspective, and it's a vision. And like our international and interdisciplinary panelists today, climate justice enables us to go beyond traditional barriers, to transcend borders, and to blur boundaries. And that means our disciplinary boundaries, often in our silos, boundaries between research and action, and also between climate science and social justice. So the World Café method is intended to facilitate conversations where everyone can participate in addressing questions, raising new questions, and generating new insights. So today's World Café will take place in 3 parts. First, I'll ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves to the full group. And next we'll move into the World Cafe portion. So I'm going to open up 3 breakout rooms that you can self-select into. And each one will be focused on a different topic. And it will be facilitated by 1 panelist from the University of Cincinnati and 1 panelist from the University of Johannesburg to facilitate international interdisciplinary conversation. So we'll have 15 minutes in each of those breakout rooms. You'll go to 2 of them during today's event, and I'll be communicating across rooms about how much time we have left before transitioning. But the idea is to facilitate conversation on a few different topics related to climate justice and scholarship. And then the third part, we will come back to the main room and share out, talk about insights generated, highlights from within the breakout rooms. And there should be also an opportunity, if we have time, for just a broader audience Q&A, which I will moderate. So let's get into introductions. So we have a fantastic panel of international interdisciplinary scholars, many of whom are early career scholars, and each of their work deals with climate change and climate justice, a variety of disciplinary angles. So before I ask the panelists to introduce themselves, I just want to invite everybody who's here today to just reflect on a couple questions. So the first question is, what brought you here today? What interests you about today's panel? What are the events in your life that landed you in this Zoom room today? And with that, I would like to ask the panelists to please introduce yourselves. And I will go with the first person on my screen, and that's Claire.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Carly. My name is Claire Underwood. I'm a PhD student at the University of Cincinnati, and I study nature-based learning in early childhood. My background is in climate justice organizing. I worked in nonprofits organizing young people and communities of faith to respond to the climate crisis. But like so many organizers, and I imagine a lot of us can relate to this, I found myself really exhausted and burnt out from that daily grind of trying to create systematic change. And so I took some time to reflect on what I really love and how I could best contribute to the movement that I care so much about. And I found that that was my love of nature and my love of being outside with young children. And so I decided to focus my efforts there, and that led me to pursuing a master's of environmental education. And that led me on to my PhD. And I'm right now studying how nature preschools are impacted and adapting to the climate crisis so that learning opportunities outside supporting children's connection to the natural world can be available to all children.
Thanks so much, Claire. Next, we have Steph.
Hi, everyone. My name's Stephanie Klarman. I'm with the University of Johannesburg in the psychology department. My research has been based on the field of conservation psychology, specifically looking at issues that include youth and capacity building, artistic forms of storytelling for conservation purposes, and also our relationships with the more than human world. My PhD work centered on the themes of environmental injustice and the influence that this has had on South African youth. So although this is not really strictly climate orientated, biodiversity conservation is multifaceted and it does include climate issues. So studying the links between social, environmental, and ecological justice issues while examining South Africa's history has also meant that I've started to take a more holistic look at the interplay between environmental issues and social ones.
Thank you so much, Steph. All right, Harsha.
Thanks, Carly. Hi, my name is Harshvardhan Bhatt. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Taft Research Center here at UC. My work sort of sits at the intersection of human geography and international relations, and I'm principally at the moment working on two themes. One on the global politics of rain, which is coming down to this book on the monsoon, and I also work on abolitionist epistemologies. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Sergio.
Hi everyone. Um, yes, my name is Sergio, and I'm from the University of Johannesburg. My research focuses, on health systems and the role of decision makers, and also the role of participants in this health system. Really, the motivation to be involved in climate justice activisms, I think, comes from my engagement with my studies, but also, the environment in the university, being involved with other like-minded students and activists, and motivating each other to believe that we can make a change. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sergio. Megan.
Thanks so much, Carly. My name is Megan Getty. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Taft Research Center at University of Cincinnati. I am an anthropologist and a poet, and so my work, my field work in the Permian Basin, which is in geological region of West Texas and New Mexico, looked at the ways that emerging groups of climate activists and citizen science scientists and artists are kind of trying to make the chemical regimes of the oil and gas industry perceptible through sensory technologies and modes of fabulation. So my work is kind of dealing with the with imperceptibility as a concept and the role of art and technology in making that perceptible. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Fatima.
Hi, everyone. My name's Fatima Peters. I'm completing my PhD at the University of Johannesburg in psychology. I'm of mixed race background with ancestors who were slaves. They were brought to Cape Town during colonization by the Dutch and the English. And in the 1960s, my family were removed from the District 6 and moved to various parts of what's referred to as the Cape Flats in Cape Town. So I come from a background of strong activism, and I met my supervisor and he introduced me to the concept of climate justice. And that's how I ended up doing my PhD on critical research methodologies in climate psychology. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I wish I could be in all three rooms for this event. But now I want to introduce everyone to what these three breakout rooms are going to be. So I'm going to open those up here in a minute. But in the first room, and I'll post these in our chat here just in a moment, so you don't have to write these down. The first breakout room is focused on research methods for climate justice. So thinking about methodological considerations in the work that we do around climate justice. And that one will be facilitated by Fatima and Megan. The second breakout room is going to be focused on climate justice research aims and outcomes. So we're going to be asking questions like research for what and who benefits and how. And that one's going to be facilitated by Sergio and Claire. And the third breakout room is focused on academia and social change. So reflecting on our role as researchers in generating or enabling societal transformation. And that one is going to be facilitated by Stephanie and Harsha. Harsha, will you introduce the main topics so that the two of you can reflect on your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the table's main question is, how do you think about the role of the researcher in scholarship for climate justice? What about the role of the researcher in society? Do we need to be rethinking our approaches to research and or social change action, and how so? So, and I guess, yeah, Stephanie and I have 1 to 2 minutes to respond to each and open the group to for discussion. Stephanie, do you want to go?
Happy to. So when I saw this immediately made me really excited because I really do feel like research and researchers ought to be having an impact in the real world. And that to me is really important. You know, I think when I entered academia, I felt as if we were being kept in a bit of a silo and our work was going into journals, which weren't necessarily even open to the public. And that to me didn't feel like it was really going to make a difference in the real world. And part of the work that I actually do now, even though it's a little bit removed from climate, is in advocacy. And I work for a conservation group that is very, very focused on ensuring that we're engaging with government, we're engaging with the public, and we're working towards policy change for wildlife. And I think for me, I feel really strongly about the work we do because it sets us apart from other welfare organizations because our peer-reviewed research has been taken to government and it has been used to actually initiate policy change. And that I think is really promising. So I do believe it's important and possible for us to be straddling the academic and the action spheres. I'm seeing it in the work that we're doing, and I think it's important that academics do start to take a stance. You know, it is important that as researchers, we start to promote the work that's important to us, especially in the climate and environmental spheres, where we're seeing so much need for urgent action, but people do believe that science and the public are so far removed from each other. So we need to start entering those spaces to have an impact. Harsha, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie, and thanks, Carly, for putting this together. Yeah, I think my view of this has sort of evolved over the years, and I mean, for me, climate justice is principally a heuristic, and it's not inherently it sort of platforms good intentions, and I think a desire to scale up environmental justice. But for me, it's work that is principally not really possible within the modern university. I mean, for me, the modern university is really there for acceleration and the accumulation of the colonial archive. And so for me, when I look at the history of 200 years of the history of the modern university, I really am just reading the history of colonial wreckage and scaling acceleration in different modes. So I think for me, climate justice therefore also sort of leads to this conversation as in terms of it's funny because I think before the call, I think Harley was referring to a paper about, folks who know what climate justice is, and I think for most people who I interact with, from farming groups and indigenous communities and so on, nobody really knows what climate justice is because the language of climatology is inherently, possessed by a certain rubric of how to see the world, and in a way, it prefigures what justice is and who delivers it. And I think it forgets, it dispossesses the time of the body to the time of the environment and the time of scalability. And in a way, it's almost like talking about climate justice at Ohio State, which was my previous employer, which, like most American our universities, is essentially a large military contractor, which thrives on the maintenance of the military and systems of engineering and uh, domination machinery. And I think, in a way, the conversation of climate justice for me is in a fundamentally an art project within the American university, because it sort of just is positioned at a mode of pacifying modes of education and rubric making, while the actual work of the university is to actually produce and subsidize knowledge systems that are meant for domination and design, and the maintenance of hegemonic systems. So that's sort of my 2 minutes on that, but but good to
Thank
be here.
you. I just wanted to jump in and say, let's hear what other people have to say, and how you feel about these questions and the role of the researcher in society related to climate justice. Would love to hear from some attendees on your perspectives.
Thea,
Okay,
please go ahead.
yeah, can I start? So my area of speciality is waste management. I do a lot of research on recycling behavior. In case you didn't know, landfill sites are number 4 in terms of release of methane gases. Climate justice in South Africa is not a reality for our people. We are fighting poverty, we are fighting crime. Uh, they don't worry about climate justice if they don't have food to eat. So I would say we are making inroads. We've got 3 spheres of government: national, provincial, and local. And unfortunately, the local governments are the people that needs to implement the laws and regulations. And politically, it's very difficult. Then the one political party is in charge of the city of Johannesburg, where I am, which is the biggest city in South Africa. And then a couple of months down the line, it's another one. So I think to get to climate justice, we must start with behavioral change. I had majors as geography and mathematics, but I had to learn and read up on the theory of planned behavior, Swart's altruism model. It was the most difficult thing. I'm not a psychologist, but I see the role of psychology and the behavioral change and awareness. I think we must really, as academia, have also education role to make people aware what are your rights and what goes wrong. From a global South perspective, I'm also part of the World Resource Forum conferences. And we've got this nice word in Afrikaans called gatvol, sick and tired. First world countries, like, sorry, America, telling us you caused a lot of climate problems and we are going to be the recipients, and we already are. And we cannot afford to implement first world technologies to change our processings and so on, because we're trying to create jobs and so on. It's very complex, but we definitely have to. I've almost had to change my attitude and become a bit more of an activist in my interactions with government officials, and they're starting to listen. They're starting. It was a total mindset change for somebody like me. I'm a scientist, give me the numbers and the figures, and I work with that. And I think we must really encourage that change in, the sciences, especially to have a more societal impact in our research. That's my 2 cents.
Any others? Erin, Susan, Issy.
Yeah, I'm also from South Africa. I'm from the Northwest University, a social worker with interest in environmental social work, which is sort of more of it's a little bit new in our area. And just to what Thea said on what works in global North does not work in global South. I mean, it's really yeah, it just doesn't work. For that reason, perhaps I'm boasting, I don't know, but I've started, I'm the founder of the African Network for Environmental Social Work and Disaster Management. And we have a group of 143 members at this stage, all over Africa, academics and community developers, practitioners, auxiliary workers. And the reason why we started this group is because, why I thought that perhaps we should do this, is with readings from solutions that are put out from global North that just doesn't work in global South. Our realities are so different, and we have to sort of look at, we have to be creative in see how we can deal with the whole climate justice issue, because it's like Thea said, if people don't have food, so they're not concerned about that. They don't have places to stay. The only place where they can stay is whatever is available, and most of the times it's on the next to the river and so forth. So they are really the ones that are really suffer the most. With regards to changing behavior, I think it's very important to we can lead by example and we can give them all this information. But I also think that the attitude change needs to happen, and I think it's not just it's a process. It's not and it's almost a change of beliefs. I think their place within the environment, and the environment, what the environment means to them, and for our future generations too, for their future generations. So yeah, that's my 2 cents as well.
Great. I saw Erin's hand go up.
Yeah, so I'm a sociologist. I don't study anything to do with environment or climate, or maybe it's related and I haven't thought deeply about it. I study paid domestic work and collaborate with domestic workers to produce some of that research. And so getting back to the big question of sort of like how to integrate public action and scholarship, I see my role as not just producing kind of scholarship, academic scholarship, but as producing some research findings that will be useful to the movement and that they can use for their own purposes and their ends. So that's sort of how I come at this from a very different topic.
Yeah. Susan.
Yeah, I can also chime in. So I'm an archaeologist, an anthropological archaeologist. So I come at climate issues from a long-term perspective. And so I think the way that I see climate justice unfold in my own scholarship is primarily through teaching and in classes such as I teach a class on people and wetlands. And one of the issues that I always am bringing students back to is the power dynamics that impact the way that certain kinds of landscapes are perceived, or that water rights are contested in different ways, who has rights, who doesn't have rights, and just bringing them back to that notion of power as an entry into climate justice from a long-term perspective.
Wonderful. I'll speak to this just briefly, and I'm also keeping an eye on the time and orchestrating all of this. So I know we just have a couple of minutes before we can cycle rooms, but I do work with climate justice activists. That's part of my research, and I'm a psychologist by training, and I I identify with a small field of community psychology, which is all about, partnering with groups, making decisions together through the research process, doing things that are guided by and shaped by the people that you're working with, and making sure that the process of the research and the outputs from the research are things that are beneficial to the people who you're working with. And so I think of the role of the researcher as, potentially beneficial and having a societal impact through the kinds of partnerships that we make and the kinds of resources that we develop, above and beyond traditional academic outputs. Having events like this, where younger, emerging scholars are showing up and learning about things, like Susan was saying about being in our educator role and shaping how people are engaging with these issues, I think is really impactful.
Imperceptibilities that are perpetuated by the oil and gas industry. And I was very interested, I guess, in this interplay between art and technology and the sort of impossibility or improbability of making evident for purposes of making measurable outcomes or something that ultimately enable ongoing extraction. So for example, one of the arts-based methods that I did for a chapter on frac quakes was looking at geophones, or the history of technology of geophones, and thumper trucks, which induce earthquakes to seismologically map the interior of the earth. Sound artists are also using geophones to make compositions, and so I was interested in practices of listening and the kind of limitations of data and spectrograms in what that technology is doing. Yeah, and I'm as just an example, but I don't want to take away too much time from others.
So yeah, Megan's doing some really amazing work on fracking and sound technology and arts-based research. And I was really enjoying what she was saying in the previous room. For myself, just to mention, I mentioned that I come from a mixed race background and that I position myself in a very, what's the word that I used? A position of in-betweenity. So the reason why I said I use that is because I come from a critical psychology background, and I'm trying to really actively work against some of the essentializing and dichotomizing way in which we think when we think about things such as race, gender, class, etc. And by taking up this position, I hope that I can improve my own critical praxis as a researcher in psychology, working with people. And so, yeah, for me, climate justice is something that justice, firstly, was something really important to me. And then learning about how climate justice actually is related to this major concept of justice, I think was really quite informative. And so for our particular room, we have a really lovely question. So the question is, what's important about dealing with climate justice in your work? Not just climate change. And relatedly, what's important to think about when choosing your approach? So my approach is a position of interbetweenity, and Megan is using arts-based methodologies. And what is it that you're working on? What interests you? What would you like to talk about? Please, everybody's free. There's no right or wrong answer. Everybody's welcome, and we'd really like to have a discussion about how do we use justice in our research. So anybody would like to start may do so. Pam, I see you smiling. Would you like to go ahead and tell us something?
Pam, talking to Pam or Pennyway?
Either one. We would be
You
happy
go,
to
Pam.
hear both.
You go.
Okay. No, okay. Let me first introduce myself and what brought me here. So I am a PhD candidate with UNISA, and I'm working on women leadership and climate change. And really what was behind the topic, what made me decide on this topic was just to understanding that climate change is an issue, and it's affecting especially South Africa. South Africa as a country, we contribute, but at the same time, we're also the receiving end of it. And then the participation of women in finding solutions and or the lack thereof, and what could be done then to try and get more women involved. The kind of justice elements, I think it's to do it in a way that would not necessarily my research discussion, but just broadly, because I'm also somehow involved in some of the work, in some of the activism work around involvement of women, is that that how do we, as we transition to a more climate just society, and taking into consideration the fact that we've come from a history of injustice, lack of involvement, and separate development. And how do you then make sure that issues of gender and women specifically are part of that conversation? So whilst as we move towards taking climate action and meeting our targets in terms of climate change, how do we do it in a way that is also deal with social justice, economic justice, and all other injustice, and that there is redistribution of resources in the process, and that people are not continually displaced, and more specifically women in this regard. That's me.
Really lovely work, Pam. Piliwe, you wanted to also add? And maybe you wanted
Thanks, Fatima. And I'm going to link in with both yourself and Pam. It's precisely that history, even though sometimes people in the global north like to cite South Africa as particularly progressive because of what happened in 1994. The historical apartheid divides remain in place. And for me, the interest is not just gender, but gender, race, and class. And it's a very difficult problem to grapple with, because in line with what you were saying earlier, Fatima, one does not want to engage in a way that ossifies, if you wish, the us and them dynamics. At the same time, one cannot ignore them because they are very much alive. And that is part of the reason why then in the research in the space, we're trying to see how we can use intersectionality as a lens without feeding us and them. So it's a bit of an intellectual minefield, if you wish. So that's what we're working with. And it's well scared because I work in a business school. The business school tends to be less inclined to bother with social justice issues and is more interested in the economic end of that tension. So that's where I'm coming in. Definitely methodologies like participative action research would work, and also narrative inquiry, because we are storytellers. So, and there's a language most of the people that we need to talk to would understand. So it's story, narrative inquiry, and if possible, participative action research. I think I can pause there just to give a sense.
Really interesting.
And in terms of my own background, my PhD was looking at the system psychodynamics, which links to psychology, the system psychodynamics of sustainability. Now I'm coming back, and then I went to women in leadership. Now I'm coming back full cycle to try and bring all those interconnected issues into one project. Thank you.
Really amazing. So I see the synergy in the research that is being done. So Pam was talking about women and trying to foreground women and the effect of climate change and climate justice on women. And Billy, were you saying that you feel that in business school, they really don't think about the social aspects to climate justice. So that those are two really strong points. Megan, is there anything you would like to say?
No, just sort of interested in everyone's work and kind of learning from that. So, Fatima, I don't know that you spoke much about your own work. I would be interested to hear more.
Okay, so my work is on critical research methods. So how is it used by people in psychology? Some of my data speaks to some of the things that I have reconsidered as a person. I think PhD pushes you to grow, and I think I've done that in leaps and bounds. So my work is on really critical research methods and how it is used. In my current context, I live in what is called Makado, and we have a major water issue where I live. This week we actually got water. I've lived here 4 years. For most of the time, we haven't gotten water. So in South Africa, I think water scarcity is a major issue. Johannesburg people, you're experiencing the water crisis, poor water quality, feces in the water, and these are some major justice issues for people that are marginalized, women, children, elderly, especially that come from townships in South Africa. Erin and Nadine, if you would like to maybe speak about your context and how you see the use of justice in the use of your methodology. So that's some of the background I have in climate justice.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I just realized my camera was off. So I didn't mean to be rude. I'm based in the English department at UJ, so I guess like Erin, I'm also a bit of an outlier. But I think my interest in being here today was based on my own research on African science fiction, which obviously then takes me into the area of like eco-criticism and future studies. And I think also science fiction as a kind of storytelling methodology to think about climate justice. I think especially from the geospecificity of these stories then being based in Africa and the kinds of blueprints they give rise to as a result of, I think, decolonizing the genre of science fiction, but then also thinking very differently in terms of African futures and what they might look like from a more localized perspective. So yeah, I think I was just interested to listen in on people's methodologies because I think English literature itself is, I think, maybe more hermeneutic than other fields. So what does it look to I think maybe borrow from other people's methodologies and styles in thinking about science fiction as a different, I think, outward looking way to think about climate justice. That's it. And
I really love that.
I'm so sorry that the timer is going right now. It's counting down from a minute. I hate this feeling of making people move on and interrupting conversations. I think what I'm learning from this event is that time flies, and this could be like a half-day workshop. We could really have our deep conversations, and I'm learning lessons about how to facilitate World Cafes. It was so wonderful to hear from each of you, and especially on the idea of methodologies and partnering. Welcome back to the main room, everyone. I don't know about you, but those conversations felt like they flew by in an instant. So I hope you got something out of the time that we had in the rooms that we went to. And I just want to spend about a minute hearing from each of the rooms on some of the key insights that you drew from the conversations that you had. And it looks like we won't have time to open it up to a broader full group discussion today, but Let's go ahead and start with room number one. So I think that's Megan and Fatima, if you want to talk a bit about some things that came up in your room, anything that kind of stood out to you.
Megan, would you like to go first?
You can go first.
Okay, so when I was listening to the amazing people in this room, I really got the sense that there was a real intersectional confluence of things that are vying for the attention and ways in which you can actually engage your own context with relation to power and justice and how to actually do that. Emma was speaking about working in somewhere in America, can't remember the place, but she was talking about how it is that you have oil refineries and people that are being affected by the oil refineries and the air being polluted, and how do you actually engage people with so many different positions and power, and how do you listen to everybody, and how do you actually do the research needed in order to sustain not only the gardens which they were working with, but also the work of the NGO. And so across all the people that I had listened to, I really got the sense that there are so many different intersectional ways in which people can engage the concept of methodologies, and people were using things such as participatory action research, narrative approaches, and Megan had a really amazing methodology relating to tracking acoustic sound mapping and how you can use this from an arts-based perspective. Additionally, I liked what Piliu was saying was that in certain contexts, your voices are like your voice as the researcher, or the things that you think are important for justice are sometimes not heard because she works in a business school. So I think in psychology also, a lot of the times when you speak about justice and people that experience marginalization, sometimes you do get silent. So I think that's also something that was interesting, in how in our research we can silence certain voices, and thinking about how we can actually maybe give more emphasis to that. So across the conversations we had, it was really useful, interesting, and just wanted to say thank you for everybody that contributed.
Thank you so much, Fatima. Let me move on to our breakout room number two and hear from Claire or Sergio. Anything stand out to you from your group?
Yeah, thanks, Carly. So our group focused on research outcomes and impacts, and Sergio offered these two really brilliant questions that I want to offer to the larger group, which is, in our research, we should always be thinking about who is excluded, and does our research challenge or does it reinforce problematic assumptions and power dynamics? And this really gets to my belief that we have to build in climate justice to the research process. We can't just hope that it's the outcome of our work. Our group also talked about staying deeply rooted in and with the communities that we work with, and the importance of research and practice, and research and activism always being connected, and that climate justice offers up these new possibilities, and that we all have a role to play in this work, but that can sometimes be challenging, especially for folks in fields where this is a relatively new conversation to be having. And just want to offer affirmation and gratitude for each of you finding your place and the wisdom that you shared today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. And that brings us to insights from our breakout room number three. Steph or Harsha, would you like to share?
Yeah, I feel like Stephanie, you're closer to the median, if I may. So perhaps if you'd be interested to.
Happy to, not a problem at all. So between our two groups, the primary issues that came up was that there is such a large difference between how the global north and the global south experiences climate issues. And a belief that as a result of these differences, the solutions that would apply to the global north cannot be applied to the global south. And I also found it really interesting. One of our participants raised the point that as a result of the poverty and the hunger that global south communities often experience, it means that climate activism really just isn't a priority for most. And, you know, to a certain extent, I agree with this, but I also think it necessitates us drawing attention to the fact that social and environmental issues are linked. And often that link isn't really clear, or it hasn't been made apparent. And when we start to actually look at that, we can see that social environmental issues are very, very closely put together. And that led to a conversation around behavior and attitude change. But for the most part, in terms of social change, the participants spoke about how scholarship needs to be useful. Teaching can be a really valuable means of raising issues such as power dynamics, and also issues around how our outputs as scholars need to have some sort of benefit. And this could come through our partnerships that we develop, the resources that we develop, and in particular, also the way that we communicate. Being able to communicate with the public is vitally important. We can't just communicate with our peer groups. So yeah, those were, I would say, the main issues that came up with our two discussions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Steph. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you to our panelists and for facilitating these conversations. Thank you to the attendees. And I just want to end by, again, thanking the University of Johannesburg, our strategic partner institution at the University of Cincinnati, and the UC International Office, who inspired the way that this took shape today, and is really invested in strengthening these institutional partnerships. And finally, the University of Cincinnati's Center for Public Engagement with Science, who really helped to bring attention to today's event and helped in a lot of ways behind the scenes.